Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's lecture, part of the Sealaska Heritage Institute's November lecture series. My name is Chuck Smythe. I'm the Director of Culture and History Department at Sealaska Heritage Institute, and I would like to thank Sealaska Corporation for the use of their boardroom, which is always a very good venue for these talks. Today, we have Dr. Aron Crowell and Professor Judith Ramos to speak on At the Glacier's Edge, People, Seals, and History in Yakutat Bay. I'll give a brief introduction. Dr. Aron Crowell is an Arctic anthropologist and Alaska director of the Smithsonian Institution's Arctic Studies Center at the Anchorage Museum, where he directs a wide range of current programs in Alaska Native heritage, languages, and arts. His research and publications in cultural anthropology, archaeology, and oral history reflect collaborations with Indigenous communities and with major museums and research institutions. He is curator and project director of the Smithsonian exhibition Living Our Cultures, Sharing Our Heritage, the First Peoples of Alaska at the Anchorage Museum. And if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to go see it. It's a beautiful exhibit and packed full of really pretty objects, really useful objects. Aron has led or contributed two major museum exhibitions, including Crossroads of Continents, Cultures of Siberia and Alaska, Looking Both Ways, Heritage and Identity of the Alutiiq People, and Gifts of the Ancestors, Ancient Ivories of Bering Straits. Judith Ramos, Kashki Kwan of the Yakutat Tlingit Tribe, is an assistant professor in the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development at UAF, and she's also a PhD student in Indigenous Studies and an NSF Fellow there. She serves as the NAGPRA officer of the Yakutat Tlingit Tribe and has been an adjunct professor in Alaska Native Studies and Education at UAA. She has also worked as a subsistence researcher, documenting traditional ecological knowledge of sockeye salmon fishery at Dry Bay. As an undergraduate student, she helped start the Alaska Native Student Club that led to the establishment of the UAA Native Student Services, which has assisted many Alaska Native students since the 1990s, and maybe earlier. But she actively documents local Tlingit stories, history, dancing, potlatch traditions and oratory, genealogy, and clan names. We are very pleased to have both of them here to discuss their preliminary research results from this summer's activity on this NSF project, and maybe earlier years too. We get to see a lot here. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you, Aron Crowell.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck, and hello to everyone. I appreciate the great introduction and Sealaska Heritage Institute's generous invitation to come and speak here today for Native American Heritage Month. And Judy and I will talk about different aspects of the Yakutat Seal Camps project from different perspectives. I'm the principal investigator for the project and focusing on the anthropology and archaeology. And Judy is folding in her research, related research, into her dissertation in Indigenous Studies. So, and we both regret that Elaine Abraham, distinguished elder of the Ganekwan and Judy's mother, and the NSF senior researcher for the project, who wanted to be here as well but couldn't make it. So we're used to working the three of us together. So we'll try to fill in. So to begin, archaeologists are following the trail of Yakutat ancestors seeking to confirm oral traditions that are centuries old. And this is George Ramos, Judy's father, leading us into the field in 2011, where we're going to visit some of the old seal camps up at the head of Yakutat Bay. Clans that originated to both the north and the south, who were speakers of Eyak, Ahtna, and Tlingit arrived in Yakutat Bay, which is a place of extraordinary natural abundance and ecological diversity. And they came in several waves, around AD 800 probably for the Eyak, Ahtna, probably somewhere around 1500, and Tlingit people moving up from the south in the 18th century primarily. And others came to trade, including Chugach, Tsimshian, and Haida people. Now, Yakutat oral traditions tell of migration, war, the founding of clans, the retreat of the great glaciers that once filled the bay, and the villages and seal hunting camps where people lived in different eras. And this panorama of history, which is known and recounted by surviving elders and recorded by anthropologists such as John Swanton, John Harrington, and Frederica de Laguna, spans almost 1,000 years and has been passed down in the epic narratives of oral tradition. And these narratives are an essential endowment of Yakutat culture and a foundation of identity. This is just some records of these oral traditions that were recorded by Harrington and de Laguna in years past. Yet some historians and anthropologists in the past have dismissed indigenous oral traditions, questioning that they could convey true history. And this is a kind of a famous quote from Robert Lowy, that he could attach no historical value whatsoever to oral tradition. But others certainly have disagreed, including Swanton and Boas. But in the absence of a written record, what the critics of oral tradition say, wouldn't these stories change in every generation, gradually transforming from fact to legend to myth and losing all reliability? Now, one way of resolving this issue is to compare oral traditions with independent evidence of the past, such as, for one, archival documents and images that were recorded by outside observers, with geological data that record changes in the landscape that also are noted in the oral traditions, in this case the retreat of the glaciers, and with the physical evidence of scientific archaeology. Now, this kind of collaborative exploration combines and cross-checks different ways of knowing about the past. And for example, by relocating sites along the old migration pathways, scientists can, and using radiocarbon analysis, we can actually date some of these events that are described in oral traditions. And it goes the other way, too. The rich cultural content of oral tradition informs us about the kinds of things that we find, including this arrow point from the Old Town site on Knight Island. This is probably about 500 years old. From the summer, allows the archaeological evidence to be interpreted. And these investigations have pragmatic as well as intellectual purposes. Yakutat and other Alaska Native communities have struggled to retain or regain their tribal lands. And historical and archaeological evidence of traditional use is paramount in legal decisions. And there's also great concern about the declining population of seals, which are the most important food resource at Yakutat Bay. And the seals gather in the ice flows in front of Hubbard Glacier to feed and give birth to their young. And is the decline of harbor seals due to overhunting, to climate change, or other factors? The answer may lie in the archaeological and environmental record of human-seal interactions over the last centuries. And for the survival of a threatened language and culture, it's beneficial for the young people of Yakutat to take part in the exciting discovery that the stories their parents and grandparents tell have a very tangible reality. And these are some of the students who worked with us this past summer. Okay, so let's look then at several phases of Yakutat history, combining these knowledge sources, and starting about 900 years ago when the mass of Hubbard and Malaspina glaciers completely filled Yakutat Bay. And at that time, people inhabited sites southeast of the bay, down there near where the present village is, including the Diuganet on the Lost River, radiocarbon dated to about 784 AD. And in oral tradition, these ancestors are remembered as Eyak clans, the Yinyedi and the Hnyedi, that had moved into the region from their original homeland to the north. And then as the ice began to retreat, show a couple settlements, other settlements here, people started living out at other sites near the mouth of the bay. And this summer we investigated one of these sites at Spoon Lake on the west side of the bay. Now this area around Spoon Lake is remembered as the oldest seal hunting place. And about 800 years ago, when the settlement was built, the glacier stood close by, so I've kind of represented the probable position of Malaspina Glacier at that point. And the seals would have congregated, like they do today, in the floating ice in front of the glacier. And the shoreline, as you can see, was farther inland than it is now. And part of the oral tradition about this area, perhaps connected to the arrival of the Ganeyakwan at Yakutat Bay from their home to the north near the Copper River, is mention of a hollow tree where travelers could go inside to listen for storms before crossing the bay in front of the ice. The date's unknown for that story, as is almost always the case in oral tradition, but it seems to refer to this time when the glacier was located out near the mouth of the bay. Now, while in the present time, this area is now covered with forest, or there probably weren't many trees back then. And here we are at the Spoon Lake site in the forest, just beginning our work this past summer. Now, in this map of the site, which is a small settlement, small village site, you can see the three large house pits. I've labeled them here as structures 1, 2, and 3, and many other smaller pits around them that mark the location of underground food caches. And there really seem to be two seasonal groupings, a summer house group, and then a single deep house surrounded by these cache pits that were probably used for storing food for the winter. And our excavations here were focused on structure 1. And here we are working inside the house. This past summer, peeling back the layers, we do very detailed mapping of everything and recording of everything that we find. Now, we can do a little bit of reconstruction here. It seems that structure 1 was a dwelling that was also used as a smokehouse. And this is the shape of the house pit, which had a floor that was well below the surrounding ground surface. And then inside, we found a central hearth down there in the middle, and then these smaller places, fireplaces around the outside on a kind of bench. And there was even a sitting rock there that maybe was for seating or for a table. And then the structure that was over the top of this house pit was probably something similar to this, made out of wood, and then covered with strips of bark. And meat and fish would have been hung inside from the rafters to cure in the smoke. The tools that we found inside included these sharp, slender ground slate points that were probably darts or arrow points for sea mammal hunting. There are microblades up here in the upper right that are used as tiny knives. There's these small, very sharp little awls that would have been for piercing leather, also made out of chert, and then a double-ended carving chisel. And then we also found knives and scrapers made from cobble spalls, and these types of scrapers were used for processing seal skins. Elders have talked to us about that. So that's one of the oldest sites in Yakutat Bay, and if we move ahead a little bit then to another phase of Yakutat history, as the ice continued its retreat, it paused in this mid-bay position around 1400 AD. And sites from this era include Pakwan, or Old Town, there on Knight Island, which dates to the 16th century. And according to oral tradition, Knight Island, which is also known by its Eyak name of Ganawas, had only recently been uncovered by the glacier at the time that it was first occupied. And in these narratives, the village is portrayed as a very large and important place, the home of the Ahtna, originally Ahtna clan, known as the Ganekwan, who migrated to Yakutat from the Chitna or Copper River area, intermarried with Eyak people on the coast, and bought Knight Island in Yakutat Bay using native copper they brought with them from their homeland. And it's very interesting when Frederica de Laguna excavated at this site back in 1949 through 1952, she found lots of copper, including these copper arrow points and decorative pins and knives. And these are all clear evidence of these Copper River immigrants who came down to Yakutat Bay around 5 centuries ago. And the narratives and place names related to Ganawas indicate that so many people lived at Old Town that the earth shook from their footsteps. And it's also said that Raven fell from the sky when he tried to fly overhead because he was overcome by the smoke from its many hearth fires. In De Laguna, you can see the features that she found on the left down there. She found only four houses at the site. But this summer we discovered many more in an area to the east on the right, about 30 additional house pits and cache pits. And to me, this was a clear indication of aligning the oral tradition more with the archaeology. It was a very big village, and we really found part of it that she did not discover before. Now, our goal wasn't to replicate De Laguna's extensive excavations, but instead to sample a small part of the archaeological midden using modern techniques. And we dug a small trench behind one of the biggest house pits on the site, and you can see the outline in the ground, and then you can see the type of house that would have made that footprint on the landscape. We were excavating in that little trench area just behind the house where people would have left their food remains and trash. So here's our work excavating that trench this past July. And we collected artifacts from this trench certainly for cultural information. We collected charcoal samples for radiocarbon dating, and suspect that the bottom of the site is probably about 500 years old. We don't have the radiocarbon dates back yet. We collected hundreds, actually thousands, of animal bones that will reveal the subsistence practices of the people who were living there. We're going to undertake stable isotope analysis of the shell fragments, and that will be very informative about water temperatures during the Little Ice Age when it was colder and when the site was occupied. And also, we're going to be doing DNA studies on the seal bones. We're very interested on the patterns of seal migration to Yakutat Bay from other parts of the Gulf of Alaska. And so a site like this is, where these bones are very well preserved, is also, it's a cultural archive, but it's also a biological archive that can show us how climate and maritime animal populations have changed over time. Now, the artifacts from the site included a barb from a halibut hook that Fred Bemis identified right away. We handed it to him, and he identified it when he was visiting the site this summer. We found that barbed arrow point, but then it's similar to others that De Laguna found at the site. These were used for both hunting and warfare. And we found this decorative copper cone. And in addition, here's a base of a sealing harpoon that came from the trench. And we know that the glacier and its floating seal rookery were fairly close to Knight Island at the time that people lived there. and it appears that the hunters were going out from the village and returning with their catch rather than needing to use the distant camps that they had in later times. So then we'll go ahead here to a final historical chapter that took place once the ice had retreated up to its present day position, and opening up the inner part of Yakutat Bay, known as Disenchantment Bay, and setting the stage for the great sealing camps of the late 19th century. One of these is Kekotlia, Eyak name, and that was the scene of our investigations last summer in 2013. Here we are excavating at that seal camp site. Now, Kekotlia really has several different locations. I'll just show you a little bit about locality 1, which is next to the aptly named Indian Camp Creek down there in the lower left. So by the late 19th century, there was a new seal hunting pattern that had emerged. Each spring during May and into June and even part of July, the entire population of Yakutat village would move up to Disenchantment Bay for the seal hunting near the glacial front. And here we see Kekotlia Camp as it was photographed in 1899 by the Harriman expedition. And for the first time, as you can see, people had access to store-bought materials, including tents and clothing and guns that were purchased from the Alaska Commercial Company. At the seal camp, they lived in the cloth tents, but they also used their traditional bark-covered smokehouses that may have been quite a bit like the ancient one we found at that Spoon Lake site. These were used to preserve the seal meat and hides in smoke and to render oil from the seal blubber. Related families, it seemed, lived in adjacent tents. There's actually sort of clusters of the tents, and may have shared a single smokehouse, of which there are 6 in a line in front of the tents. And in the upper photograph, which was just photographed down the line of the bark huts, you can see them. Those are in front of the tents. One of the hypotheses, and I'm really looking forward to talking to elders about this, is that the spatial arrangement of the households at the camp, with a group of tents and then a single smokehouse for each group, may have replicated the arrangement of the 6 lineage houses that were at the old winter village on Kantek Island. Seen here, people spaced themselves out at the camp the way they did in the winter village, perhaps. Now, we relocated this camp in 2011, and a small portion of the old camp survives along the shoreline. So there's the 1899 photograph, and then that's the same shoreline down there, and in that area indicated is where we found part of the seal camp. Now we were checking our location. You can see that photograph you saw before. We were aligning it with the ridge line nearby, and you can see how they correspond. So we knew we were standing in the right place. However, the landscape has changed quite a bit since 1899, and there was a major earthquake about 4 months after the Harriman expedition was there in June that uplifted the whole shoreline several meters. And now of course, that moved it back from where the water is. And this is back in this area and up on this terrace. So there's an old uplifted beach terrace, and the remains of the camp are on top of that terrace. Now it's about 50 or 60 meters back from the shoreline, and it's become very thickly overgrown with alders in the meantime as well. Now, if this is just a representation of that terrace, and then a stream channel that comes by, and then the beach, and then is out that way. And here are the outlines of some of those structures that we saw in the Harriman photographs. These are rock circles that are, some of them are probably from the tents, and some are from the bark smokehouses. And this is what one of those looks like. This one actually has an inner line of smaller stones which were inside the tent and held the sides down, and then larger rocks that encircle it, and that's where you tied the lines that help support the tent. This is a representation of where we found all the artifacts inside and around these houses. And there were, hundreds of artifacts inside the tents, including items that reflect family life and crafts, and this broad shift in material culture that had taken place as people became consumers of Western goods. This structure 1, structure 2, those are both tents, and then there's a hearth feature there that was covered with seal oil. This is where they were rendering the blubber to make oil. And there were hundreds of these tiny seed beads in many different colors, which match elders' memories of their mothers and grandmothers beading moccasins and regalia in camp. And then this took place during the lulls between the hard work of processing seal hides and blubber. And firearms, which became available starting in about the 1870s, made hunting more efficient. And at the same time, a commercial market for sealskins and oil emerged through trade with the Alaska Commercial Company. And the seal hunts in Disenchantment Bay increased, going from what was probably several hundred seals that were taken before to several thousand animals per year, now partly for subsistence and partly for sale. And the most important product then and now is the blubber, which the female seals accumulate for their nursing period in the spring. And then the oil that is rendered from the blubber, of course, is a very important food item in Yakutat, but it also found a commercial use along with whale oil as for lighting and as a lubricant. But it appears that even this intensified, partially commercial harvest was sustainable year after year, suggesting that the population must have been enormous compared to the present. For example, even after 1927, when the seal bounty hunting period started, there were about 10,000 seals a year being killed here in Southeast without apparent diminishment of the seal herds. And so taken together, the oral information, the archaeological and historical data on seal hunting suggest that gives us a better understanding of the balance between humans and natural factors in the fluctuation of the seal numbers. And the really striking fact is that the seals have declined dramatically since the mid-1970s, down 70 or 80% in Southeast. And this is during the time period after all of this commercial hunting, when the seals were protected. And today, only a few hundred are taken for food in Yakutat. And the marine scientists agree that hunting is not the cause of this decline, and that we need to look for explanations in the changing marine ecosystem. And I mentioned at the beginning that archaeology can be the basis for indigenous land claims. Our discovery of the archaeological remains of Kekotlia Seal Camp, which had eluded previous researchers, could potentially open the way for reapplication for native ownership under Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which was previously denied because the oral and photographic documentation that I showed you about traditional use of this area was judged insufficient. And then this is in 2013, community visit to the site to see our findings. And at that visit, elders asked the ancestors to forgive our intrusion into a place that is so richly remembered in oral tradition and where the entire community used to gather each spring over a century ago. But this spot is a page of history that cannot be forgotten. I did want to show a 6-minute film, if I'm not running over time.
Yeah, it's already.
Oh, maybe we'll.
It's already one.
Okay, why don't you come up, and if we have time, we'll show that.
Thank you.
Okay, so Judy is going to come up to speak now, and my hope is that our combined presentation will convey some of the real excitement and potential of working in this collaborative way to join indigenous and scientific knowledge. So thank you very much, and I do want to thank Sealaska Corporation and Heritage Institute, which along with National Science Foundation and other sponsors has really helped our work, and the Yakutat Tlingit Tribe, which has been very, very supportive. So, Judy, thank you very much.
Gonna cheese hot ya di da kut tu hot do sa Ahtna ya hot kashkwana ya hot put na hot ya ya hot take we di da chana ya grandpa's over there. So my introduction is I am from Yakutat. I'm from the Kashkakwan clan. I'm Raven Moiety, and I'm from the House of the Owl. My father is Koho from Dry Bay, and my grandfather is Brown Bear, so my grandfather's sitting there. This is just gives you an overview of the Yakutat territory. So in the Yakutat territory, we have 3 clans. We have the Gahiak, the people from the Icy Bay area, which are the northern people. Then my people are from Icy Bay to Yakutat, and then my grandfather's people, he's from the Dry Bay area, are the people on the south. So we have 5 major clan owners in Yakutat. Currently, I'm an assistant professor with the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development, and I'm a graduate student in the Indigenous PhD program. I'm a RAP fellow, and what the RAP program is they provided my education, but also it's a program where you balances science with social science. So I have to balance science in my program with social science. So this gives you an overview of the Yakutat territory, and what it is. It shows you our close relationship with the ecosystem and the glaciers, and it's tied to our genealogy and cosmology. So as a PhD Indigenous student researcher, we have, by our training and our thought, are trying to look at the field of building Indigenous research. What is Indigenous research, and how is it different than Western research? So we go back and take a look at how, as Indigenous people, we view the past, which is different than the academic system. What is the Indigenous view of land as a living landscape, as opposed to archaeology and geology, which is the Western frame of thought? We have a different view of the past, a different way of thinking of history. How is that different? And trying to build this base of knowledge and looking at that. What is Indigenous science? So we look at traditional ecological knowledge. And for me, this is the most important part of why I'm in this research, is for the language and culture documentation, because we have only 5 fluent elders left in my community, and they're in the mid-80s. They're very old, so we need to document this language and culture knowledge quickly before they pass. And also, as part of this, is pass this knowledge down to the next generation. So it was very important for me to get the young people involved in this project. That's why I pushed really hard to get the students as part out to the dig this last summer. And my children were involved in the research this summer. So harbor seals are very important of our diet. And I think all of you probably have eaten harbor seal. You know how delicious it is. So Yakutat is one of the highest harvesters of harbor seal in Alaska. In 2001, I did a subsistence survey, and we harvested 262 harbor seals by 36% of the native households, and it was used by 78% of the native households. So it's a very important part of our subsistence resources. In the past, it was much more important because moose and deer are new to the Yakutat area. So in the past, we didn't have that meat source. We didn't have moose, that's new, and we didn't have deer, that's new. But now, so harbor seal played a much more important part of our diet in the past. So when I look at this landscape, this cultural living landscape, it brings back our cosmology, and So our view of Tlingit history is the view of importance of place, its relationship to clan, the spiritual mythological importance of the place, the narratives of how we, the Yakutat Tlingit Tribe, came to be who we are, from the events and name places that are recounted through story, clan names, and songs. So most of our old tradition, our cosmology, begins with the retreat of the glaciers in southeast Alaska and the great flood that happened, and many of our cosmology begins with this event. So my clan's oral history begins of when we formerly lived in the interior of Alaska, and we all say it's in the Ahtna area. So the name Eyak was now the Big Bremner River is the Copper River, and that's our origin. So we traveled over glaciers, and we'd say this is very important because many of us died on these glaciers, on this long journey over the glaciers from the interior to the Yakutat area. And when we came, our first village was in Icy Bay, and when we came to Yakutat, there was this Hubbard Glacier, was all the way from Point Mamby to Creary Island. So the Malaspina and Hubbard Glacier have the same Tlingit name because when we came, they were one glacier. So this is our importance of looking at the relationship place names to our origin history and this information like that. The thing that the elders always talk about is this spiritual ecology, our spiritual connections to land. And we have these stories about how glaciers and mountains are really important to us. So Mount St. Elias is our atu, and it's also our guiding post. And it was our compass of who we are as a Kashkekwan people. So it is part of our identity, and we are always known as the Mount St. Elias people. So these are living beings, they're spiritual guides to us, and Hubbard Glacier too is a very important part of our ecology and spirituality. So we believe that all of these were beings that we call them Situkwani. So my mother has this quote, she says, when we got there, when we came from the interior and got to the coast, it was a foreign territory. They didn't know what to eat or how to live, so the spirits of that place adopted them. They adopted the humans by showing them how to hunt seal. The humans became part of that glacier. They became friends of the spirit of the glacier. That is why we have a special connection with the glaciers and the mountains of that area. So this is the significance of our living connections to Hubbard Glacier as a being, living being. Part of the ceremonies that we held on there was this apologies to the spirits of the place, because these were places that were from long ago, and at first sight we didn't even have a name for that place. It was so old, and we disturbed the spirits when the archaeologists went in and were digging in the ground and disturbing the spirits. So apologizing for disturbing them, and asking the ancestors for protecting and thanking them for their guidance. So we always put the food in the fire to our ancestors and thanking them for our ancestors. And also the elders talk about how we always fought for the land, because we were always on a battle with the Chugach from the north protecting the land. And this is another important, our blood was spilled for this land and protecting this land. So that's all part of this ceremony that we held. So this main part that we did is documenting the mapping of these place names and recounting the oral history of our migration, and mapping the seal hunting sites, and all these interviews are being video documented, and we're transcribing all of these interviews. So this is my mother and one of the other elders from Yakutat, part of the interviews that we're doing. So she did this interview in Tlingit, so we would have the interview in our language. So important part of documenting the place names was we have 3 languages of place names. We have the Aleut, the Eyak, and the Tlingit names. And so when I did a comparison of the place names to place, I found an interesting correlation. between the three languages. So 4 of the place names are identified as Aleut or Supiaq. 14 of the place names are identified as Eyak, and the rest of the place names are Tlingit. So the 4 place names that are Aleut are located only in the outermost part of Yakutat Bay, and they are at the beginning of the Hubbard Glacier recession. And the Eyak place names extend from the mouth of Yakutat Bay to as far as Knight Island and Humpback Creek, so there are no more place names past this area, so that's about halfway up the bay. And Tlingit names extend to the whole of Yakutat Bay. So there is a definite correlation between the different kinds of languages that were there and the place names. And that was an interesting correlation between that. But also from place names, you get an idea of the environmental history. For example, Kantak Island comes from the meaning of lupin and Eyak, which means that from that place name, there was no trees on that island when we first came there. Also, we acquired our names from place. So when we came there, we bought Koshkekwan Creek. That's now why we're known as the Koshkekwan people. So Koshk is humping Eyak and Kwan is Tlingit. The other thing mentioned, many of these places are not recognized under contemporary laws or regulations or tribal law. So that's important that we need to work on documenting this information so we can protect them. So this is the place names map from Tom Thornton. The other thing I'm looking at is how we traditional stewardship of resource and place and resources. So this is the 3 Kwans I mentioned and the 5 clan landowners in the Yakutat area. The Koshkekwan were the landowners for the Hubbard Glacier area. So we monitored the resources, and the chief was very strict that no hunting happen in that area when the seals were pupping. So the clan leaders monitored the land resources and water. Also, what is the role of values and beliefs in conservation and ethical moral hunting and conservation practices? And you know that these beliefs, traditional beliefs about no wanton waste, and these all are a very important part of the ethical moral hunting practices practiced by our people. So this is looking at the clans. At the time of the Harem exhibition, there were other clans from other communities that were there. They were strictly governed by the Koshkekwan clan. So there are other communities that were harvesting Hubbard seals during the Harem exhibition. So looking at traditional knowledge and harvest of use of seals. So this is my great aunt, my grandfather's side, Jenny Abraham, that she's harvesting the seal hides and the flippers. So looking at some of these questions, the role of men and women, traditional training of hunters, what equipment and techniques are used, the method of hunting, selection of seals, seasons and hunting areas, traditional methods for processing seal and hide. So this is Indigenous knowledge, documenting Indigenous knowledge of seal hunting and seals. So this is some photographs of my father when he was a young guy. He was a very young teenager when he was learning seal hunting from his uncle there, and my dad doing his warrior pose. I like to talk, one of my favorite photos. So they employed these dugout canoes. They would kill them with the barbed spears. And so what he says is they would use these short paddles, and they wouldn't even lift them out of the water, and they would paddle as quietly as they could, and they wouldn't even lift the paddles out of the water, so it was like paddling under the water, so they would be able to sneak up to the seals. So documenting that information, and they wore these waterproof gloves made from seal hide and seal oil. They used these rocks in their canoes, and then as the seals would come in. So there was a lot of technology and knowledge used in order to hunt seals in the ice. Traditionally, we use these gudillas, which are special ice-breaking canoes. So Indigenous knowledge, and one side was a prow they'd use to prow and break the ice, and then the free water they'd flip the canoe around and use the other end of the canoe to hunt seals. And he even remembered a song that went along with this gudilla, which I had never heard before. He remembered the special song they call the Gudea. So these are special technology that they use for hunting seals. So he talked about the hydrology and understanding of the ocean currents and water. So I like to call this hunting along the edge. As the current would come out of Russell Fjord, it would create a lead in the ice, and they'd always hope this lead in the ice would open up to a herd of seals. So he talks about how he'd come around and come in and look at all the ice coming out of Russell Fjord, and then once it was the tide and currents are right, they would follow this lead and hoping it would open into a herd of ice. So they had to understand that the weather currents and ice in order to hunt in the ice. So you have special Tlingit names for certain kinds of ice and things like that. So they talk about the different kinds of ice icebergs, and they have special Tlingit names for these icebergs. They had to understand the seal behavior. These are some of the questions that they're looking at. Pupping success, seal health, predator-prey relationships, and he had some interesting stories about the killer whales that I collected from him. So here he talks about the correct way to shoot a seal, and you can click on it, click on him, and it'll come up.
It throws his head backwards, and the air comes out of his lungs and he sinks. That's why you gotta wait till they look away from you and hit them, or just pushes their head down.
So he talks about how you shoot a seal. So if you shoot it the wrong way, then it would his lungs would fill with water and he'd sink. But if you shoot him the right way, his lungs would fill air and it'll remain buoyant, so you can have time to get over there and get the seal before it's sunk. So here's how the way they used to pick off the seals. They would shoot first the watcher seal, and then continue to hunt to get the rest of the seal. So that there was always that one watcher seal that they would shoot to get they'd kill him first, try to kill him first. So and they would use low caliber rounds, so it would sound just like ice falling off the glacier, and it wouldn't scare the seals. So looking at traditional methods of processing seal and hide, so this is pictures of my dad and my brother fleshing out a seal. Traditional knowledge and names for seal anatomy, and I know some names were collected in Rangoon of seal anatomy, so I went over some of these with my dad to compare them to see if they were the same or if there was other names that we used. What is the role of the harbor seal in the subsistence economy of the past and present? So seal oil is very important, and the main reason we got the seal was we need the seal oil for preservative, but the other parts, it was also important. The hide and the meat were very important. So this is also the subsistence cycle. So springtime, we only went up there. When we went up there traditionally, we also went up there to harvest black bear and harvest bird eggs were very important, as well as celery and clams and cockles and seaweed. So this is a very important part of the harvesting of the spring harvest, is the cycle of the seals, and that's my dad's climbing around getting seagull eggs. Seal moccasins at that time, we didn't have a lot of cash economy, so the women kind of decided what kind of seals hides they wanted, so to have the moccasins, and moccasins was one of the main ways that they could sell and get the cash economy at that time. So from the beginning, our family's been very involved with getting this research off the ground and helping direct it. We've been my dad and everything. We've been using our boats, and my brother was at the first season. He was part of the boat. Took his boat up there, and so we've been very involved with getting this community in the research, and getting places for the interviews, identifying the hunters to be interviewed, and all this. We've been very involved in the project. So it's very important that we have the local understanding of the environment, what places are not good, because some of these places are very dangerous. places, and we have to be really careful to tell them that when you go to this area, and there's been sometimes we had problems with the currents that would come in, and it would cause problems. So that was very important. Also, the community and tribal accountability, to say that the research has to come back to the community, that all the information that is documented will come back to the community, and in the long term we'll have this information that's going to be videotaped and documented for future generations. So that we've been very involved in that project, and my son Kai was part of the video documentation, and then my mother is a senior researcher, and my dad, of course, provided a lot of information in the original start of the project about the knowledge of the seal hunting. So this is kind of a brief overview of my project. And these are some of the results. And did you want to play the video?
Yeah, thank you.
More than 1,000 years ago, my people migrated from the interior of Alaska down to Yakutat. This is one of the songs that came down with them. Sanadu, sanadu, sa. Sanadu, sanadu, sa.
The spirits of the ocean is really important in this area. Hubbard Glacier and Mount St. Elias became the caretakers of these foreign people that were coming down and settling on their land.
This film is a story of a glacier spirit and its domain, a people that have lived through 4 cultures, and of the traditional way of hunting harbor seal.
It was a foreign country. They didn't know what to eat, they didn't know how to live, and the spirits of that place, I guess you can say, adopt them. They adopted the humans. They showed them in spirit how to hunt seal, and they became part of that glacier. They became friends of the spirit of the glacier. Yeah, no one lived there, it was all ice.
And so why was Hubbard Glacier and Disenchantment Bay important for the Yakutat Tlingit people?
One, two, 3 glaciers here, 1 glacier there, and 1 glacier there, and the whole thing was just black. I'm talking about thousands of seals.
I am really excited about this project. I have dreamed of doing some of these things in Yakutat for the 2nd generation. We need to know where their ancestors camped and where they lived and where they gathered their food. Under oral tradition, we can talk about it, but to have it validated by scientists, we need that database for the 2nd generation. In the past, anthropologists wrote about us, wrote about the people, but now the generation have changed. No longer can they write about us and expect it not to be read and judged. And that's where we are today. We have scientists that are native, but we need to leave this data for them.
get loaded. These guys work like mules. They're still going. This is the site that the archaeologists from the Smithsonian Institute just uncovered. There's always reservations you have, of course, of strangers coming into your land like this, and handling things that belong to your ancestors and your family. But I know they have nothing but the best of intentions. So overall, I'm very fascinated.
We came out in 2011 knowing that a major seal camp was in this place. We also knew that there had been a very large earthquake in 1899 that uplifted the land here. We looked fruitlessly through the upper reaches of this delta here and were unsuccessful. Not only has the beach been uplifted, but it's also been covered by alders, ferns, and then there's Devil's Club. We've cut down quite a bit of the vegetation, but one of the things that we discovered was the remains of one of the seal camp houses. And you can see in the photographs that there were tents and also bark-covered structures that the families lived in when they came here to seal camp. It was a proof of concept. We had a small grant from National Science Foundation to demonstrate, if possible, that these camps still existed as archaeological sites, and that we could tie archaeological information to the oral traditions and historical photos. And we were able to do that. And we're not done yet. Yeah, well, thank you. That's just a trailer. We do have a feature film in production about the whole project, all 4 years. Kai, Judy's son, is the co-director of the film, and so we're really happy to have that. It's a trailer. It's a preview of some of the themes of the film, but glad we had a chance to show that to you. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, we have an hour. We've extended an hour, but there's plenty of time. You can stay here a little longer if people want to ask questions and stay as long as you like. So, yeah, please go ahead. Thank you. Do we have any questions? For those of you who might be interested, that site that was featured here, that upland site, was a 14H1 site that was selected by Sealaska under ancestral and went through a period twice. They appealed the denial of that site because each time the BIA went out there, they could not find any physical remains of that site. And I was involved the first time we did research and looked into it, found the BIA actually, when they went out there in winter. So there was snow covering the ground. So they said they couldn't find the site. You know, but unfortunately, we weren't able to convince them that site was there. So this is a great outcome of this project to document not only that site, but the importance of that site in this ecosystem.
We were very excited to find the physical remains. It was making that connection between the oral tradition and elders' memories, and then relocating the actual physical evidence of that. So it may have implications in the future, as Chuck is saying, for the ownership of that land, which is it's currently Forest Service, part of Tongass. So.
Well, I have a question if I can.
Joe. Well, I don't have a question, but I'll start to maybe break the ice a little bit. Just by thanking you, I guess. I'm Joe Nelson, but so in many ways this is powerful for me because I grew up from Icy Bay to Dry Bay, hunting and fishing on all these places, and I remember as a kid fishing Spoon River when waiting for the river to break. Spoon Lake
Interesting.
breaks into a river in the fall time.
Right.
And my family, we've got land from Icy Bay to Dry Bay. We just grew up in this area, and my mom tells me I was part of the last commercial hunt in the early 70s as a little baby. My dad did all these sorts of things through the 60s. And as the chairman of the Sealaska board and on the Heritage Trustees and Yakutat Kwan board I'm on as well, I think this is just this type of work and this integration, this teamwork, it's a powerful tool to create bridges here, but also to provide a little bit of inspiration and historical context for our younger folks. So thank you for engaging the younger folks, and I'm excited, and I know that Kai's involved with the media production and these storytelling, this new way of storytelling, I think is going to help keep things alive, and it is a critical time to keep doing more. But this is hugely powerful, because Westerners don't really get seal at all. And I remember being laughed out of classrooms and mocked for talking about seal hunting in urban areas, and that still happens today. But it's just part of who we are, and it's very cool to see, I guess, in this setting. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you, Judy, you and your mother, your family. I'm from Angoon, and I feel like I learned something that's tying us together, because the elders in Angoon always spoke about going to Yakutat. They called it Yakutat. In their huge canoes, they said they visited each other. So to me, this kind of binds us together. So I would like to say thank you to all of you. It's been interesting, and I'm so proud that we do have the Native American month here celebrated. So Ganesh Chish, tell your family hello, your dad.
Could you tell us a little bit about the film you're planning to do that's coming out of this project?
Sure, thanks. Well, we really decided from the very beginning that we needed really high quality video documentation, starting with the interviews, many hours of interviews with the elders of Yakutat, who started, that's where we started with telling this story. And then it expanded to the archaeological research and the geological research. And I think we now, after 4 summers of filming, I think we have the material for a really great hour-long or 2-hour-long documentary. You can see there are many strands to the story that are historical, they're ecological, they're cultural, and I think to really do justice to that is a challenge. But we have great film material. This will either be an indie documentary film. We are talking to Smithsonian Channel, who may produce it. So that's a future project. But it's really been very great to have Judy and Kai so much involved in the film production too. It's everyone has really opened up in the community. They're excited about the project, shared so much information. It's just everything from being up in the ice, hunting, filming the seal hunt this spring was really amazing. That's part of the film, and then there's all the field research and interviews. So that's in progress, along with all the other results from the project in terms of publication and media. So, and actually, Sealaska Heritage Institute was is on board as one of our sponsors for the film too. Put in kind of the seed money to get it off the ground. So really appreciate that.
My name is Jessica Chester, and my family comes from Dry Bay on Ahtna, and I just want to thank you for sharing your knowledge, your clan knowledge. I know that's priceless, and I teach at Harborview School and Tlingit language, and I have some Eyak Kwan kids in there, and I know a little bit more now, and I now know where to find, to help them steer towards learning more about themselves. So thank you, Chief, for doing this research. It's so important.
There is a web page and a Facebook for this site if you can find it, Smithsonian Yakutat, or Yakutat Seal Camps Project. So, yeah, so anyway,
And some of the films on Vimeo too.
Yeah.
that film is on Vimeo and YouTube, and so there's more. We're working on another small version of the film that'll come out soon. So, well, I think for my part, thank you very, very much for having us here today. Really enjoyed it, the opportunity. Okay.